The American Horror Story series, so far, is considered one of the best in the horror trailer genre. Many of the characters in the series have been based on real people. In this issue, I will introduce you to several possible prototypes of characters from one of the creepiest and most intriguing seasons of the show, devoted to circus freaks. And they're not the only ones. The prototype of the Moby Kid's kid was most likely the legendary Lucia Serrate, the diminutive girl I told you about in one of my last videos. But she could also have been the prototype of an equally amazing girl, Paulina Musters. She became the smallest adult woman in history, even made it into the Guinness Book of World Records. After all, her height was only 56 centimeters according to some sources, and 58 centimeters according to others. Pauline was born in 1876 in the Netherlands. By the age of 18, she weighed less than 4 pounds. Performing since infancy, people were amazed by her tiny size, but as she grew older, Pauline's fame only grew. She became a skilled acrobat and dancer. Pauline toured all over Europe until she visited the United States in 1894. There was no shortage of applause, and she was dubbed the Little Queen of the stage. She became a favorite in New York, but alas, her star faded too soon. A few months after her arrival in New York, Pauline fell ill with pneumonia and died on March 1, 1895, in a local hospital. The prototype for Legless Susie was most likely the remarkable entertainer Ellie Bowen. He was born in Ohio in 1844 with Falkmeyer and disproportionate feet that were glued directly to the pelvis. And among his 10 brothers and sisters, he was the only one with such a defect. Ellie aspired to live the most active life and was the best at his profession. He dreamed of becoming an acrobat. Ellie Bowen became famous as a legless acrobat. He did the most difficult acrobatic jumps, climbed up the pole and held on it under the dome on one arm. At the same time, he was very good-looking and at one point was considered the most attractive artist of Barnum's Circus. Of the many groupies, 26-year-old Ellie Bowen chose 15-year-old Maddie, who ended up giving him 4 healthy sons, whom he loved madly. It wasn't for nothing that he was most often photographed with his sons. All of his sons became successful businessmen and lawyers, but he loved the circus and the appreciative audience so much that he performed almost until his death. And he died in 1924 in his own home at the age of 79. But no less remarkable, a possible prototype of Susie was without attraction the legendary Nikolai Kobalkov. He was born in 1851 in the vicinity of what is now Troitsk, Chelyabinsk region. He suffered from tauromania. He had no arms and legs, but despite this, he became a legend and conquered all of Europe. He was lucky to be born into a wealthy family. His parents did not abandon the child and gave him the best education they could. At one point, Kobalkov met the theater director Berg and moved to St. Petersburg, where he began doing performances. He could thread a needle, untie complicated knots, extinguish a candle with a pistol shot, and was so strong that he could lift an adult without problems. His deadly number, when Kobalkov walked into the cage with a lion, was a particular success. Naturally, everything ended well, and he became famous not only in Russia, but throughout Europe and even in America. While on tour in Austria, Nikolai met 18-year-old Anna Wilford, the sister of a local entrepreneur. They soon married, and the couple had as many as 11 children. His wife became a real muse for Kobalkov, and after her death in 1913 he stopped performing, although he continued to be successful in business. His public enjoyed his performances so much that his royalties, and coupled with his success in business, allowed him to leave his children a fortune after his death. Nikolai died in 1933 at the age of 82 in Vienna, surrounded by his large family. And the next unusual man, originally from Canada, although not a character in the series, is also worth mentioning. He had a unique ability: he could smoke through the eye. His name was Alfred Langevin. He performed in the 30s and 40s and could not only smoke through his eye sockets, he could even inflate balloons and play the trumpet. The cause of his eye anomaly has never been figured out. Perhaps it was due to the peculiarity of the development of his tear glands. The prototype character Mip, played by Ben Wolfe, was the legendary Coco the Bird Girl. She didn't suffer from any such special illnesses, and it's all the more surprising that she became a true symbol of the American circus freak show. Her real name was Minnie Woolsey. She was born in Georgia around 1880. She is believed to have what is called Sickle syndrome. This syndrome is quite rare, and people with this syndrome are characterized by dwarfism, a small head, but with a beak-like deformity of the lower jaw. On top of that, Minnie Woolsey was almost completely bald and blind and suffered from mental retardation. As legend has it, the useless girl with thumb-thick glasses spent her entire childhood in an orphanage. But then she was found by the owner of a freak show, who not only saved her, but made her a celebrity. At first the girl was very shy, but soon she loosened up. She happily danced and gave such ridiculous interviews that the whole audience fell with laughter. She also starred in the legendary movie Freaks, and after her film success, she continued to dance in a bird costume. But the disease progressed. At one point, a new show was invented for her, Blind from Mars. Minnie would stand or sit on stage for hours and pay absolutely no attention to the most elaborate attempts to wake her up. To the raucous laughter of the audience, it is likely that by then Minnie was not just blind or deaf, so she could not react to the world around her. But Minnie's fate is not thoroughly known. There is an opinion that she successfully performed almost to the age of 80 until her death. Allegedly, she was hit by a car. The character of American Horror Story Jimmy suffered from the rare disease ectrodactyly. Such people grow on their hands, feet, and fingers in arbitrary numbers and sizes. In a previous video, I told you about perhaps the most prominent circus freak show performer with the disease, Grady Stiles. But the creators of the series were clearly inspired by another man, namely Freddie Wilson. Apparently, this good-looking guy was the very first circus freak show performer with the disease. Very little is known about him, and almost no pictures of him have survived. Freddie was born in the town of Somerville, Massachusetts, in 1866. In addition to ectrodactyly, he also had a congenital deformity of the teeth. He was from a fairly well-to-do family and did not perform for long. How his fate turned out is unknown. Apparently, Freddie at some point didn't like such a peculiar job, and he left the circus for good. Pip and Flip was the name of the creative duo who became the prototypes of Salty and Pepper. Sisters Jenny Lee and Elvira Snow were born in Georgia and suffered from the same disease as the legendary Schlitz's, microcephaly. In this disease, the cranial box does not develop as they grow and mature, and with it, the brain remains as a small child. Over the years, the appearance of such people becomes more and more unflattering. The girls' parents were pragmatic and cruel people. The girls were born 12 years apart. They were both given to the circus so that the rest of the family could live comfortably on royalties. But unlike other circus freak performers, who more often than not evoke either surprise or ridicule, the Snow Sisters duo evoked tenderness and pity with their childlike naivety and underwhelming simplicity. The organizers gave him the legend that the girls were actually Yucatan Indians Pip and Flip. Like many circus freak performers, they also starred in the legendary movie Freaks, after which their word of mouth skyrocketed, and they earned a fabulous $75 a week by then standards. But the younger sister, Jenny Lee, died at the zenith of her fame at age 21. Elvira lived a long life and lived to be 75. The prototype of the bearded woman Ethel was undoubtedly the most famous bearded woman of the circus freaks, Annie Jones. She was born in Virginia in 1865. Rumor has it that her chin was already covered in hair at birth, but her parents' shock quickly passed when they realized that they had a terrific chance to make good money on the freak circus show that was gaining popularity in those years. Jones wasn't even a year old when her parents signed a contract with Barnum's Circus for fabulous money. As she grew older, her popularity did not diminish. Despite her very brutal appearance, she showed her femininity in every way possible, sang beautifully, played her guitar, and thus played on the contrast of her appearance, and it worked. She became Barnum's most popular circus performer. She was married twice and even at one time tried to give up performing, but after the death of her second husband E&I returned to Barnum and performed there until her death. She died in 1902 of tuberculosis at the age of 37, never having given birth to a child. Who was the prototype of Bet and is not easy to say, for there were quite a few Siamese twins in the Freak Church, but it is quite possible that they were sisters Millie and Christine McCoy. The sisters were born in 1851. Their parents were slaves, and the 10-month-old sisters were sold to perform for a fabulous, at the time, $1,000, and they became known as the Royal Twins. They were resold several times before the sisters were finally bought out by showman Person Smith. He taught the sisters to read and write and ennobled their performance. After slavery was abolished, the sisters decided to stay with their manager. By then they were earning up to $600 a week and were able to help their entire extended family. Their fans included some of the most prominent figures of the time, right up to Queen Victoria, who even invited the sisters to perform at Buckingham Palace in 1871. The sisters joined Barnum's Circus and performed as long as their health permitted, after which they went south, took up charitable work and died a quiet death in 1912. Many have been waiting for more clips about the circus freaks. In the Freak Circus videos, many times the last name Barnum has been heard. Let me tell you about him. In 1932, the famous American director Todd Browning made a feature film called Freaks. Being to some extent a tragicomedy, to some extent a melodrama, the film was severely curtailed by the censors almost immediately after the filming was over, by about 45 minutes, and then banned altogether. It was included in the National Film Registry in the United States more than half a century later, in 1994. The problem was that Browning was not afraid to make a film on a topic that was forbidden by that time. The film is about the dying out freak show genre, about people who had no other way to make a living but to show their own ugliness. Today, the freak show as such does not exist. Medicine has advanced over the last 100 years, and the ethics of human relationships have changed dramatically. For the most part, people with disabilities are cured or provided with normal living conditions, and rightly so. In the 19th century, the attitude was quite different. For a huge number of people who today could lead a full life, there was only one road to the circus of freaks. But there were positive sides to this road. Many freaks made a lot of money and could support themselves better than other healthy people. For example, the legendary camel girl Ella Harper, at the height of her career, 1885 to 1886, made $200 a week at Harris Circus. Including inflation today, that equates to a salary of $25,000 a month. That's a lot, isn't it? The genre's beginnings. The demonstration of various aberrations of the human body has been popular since the dawn of time. From a psychological point of view, this is a win-win for business. Even today, we are tempted to look back at a disabled person passing by, and we cannot explain this impulse in terms of logic. But looking back at passers-by is ugly and uncomfortable. And freak circuses provided a legitimate opportunity to look at anomalies gathered in one place and beautifully decorated. That's why almost every circus since ancient Roman times necessarily had people with physical disabilities. They had their own acts along with strongmen and acrobats. In the 16th century, Europe began to transition to a market system of relations. Mobile circuses were no longer a gathering of clowns who earned mostly in alms and handouts. Already in the 17th century, many circuses charged a fixed entrance fee, and circuses, stopping at the fair, paid money for the rent. The circus business began to become really profitable. Whereas in the 15th century, circus performers were basically beggars and the circus fit into a single carriage, 2 centuries later the circus business became a business. This is not a real freak, but Charles Laughton in The Hunchback of Notre Dame, 1939. Brilliant makeup was done by Hollywood's best expert of the 1930s, Perk Westmore. And within that business, a strange and unpleasant trend began to develop actively, the freak show. Whereas in Quasimodo's time, the handicapped man's fate was punches and rotten eggs, the new age began to bring in freaks for a profit. These 3 centuries, from the 18th to the early 20th, were the golden era of freak shows. The profits were already substantial, and public morality allowed for any kind of cruel treatment of unusual people. In the 17th century, the first famous freaks who made a fortune from their looks appeared. The most famous freaks of the time were the Siamese twins Lazarus and John Baptiste Coloretto from Genoa. John was not so much a man as an underdeveloped offshoot growing roughly out of his brother's chest area. He always kept his eyes closed and his mouth open. He could not speak. Nevertheless, it lived, moved, and even took food. Apparently, the brothers' digestive systems were separate. Lazarus, being quite a mobile and slender man, not counting half of his brother growing out of his front side, traveled all over Europe in the first half of the 16th century, Denmark, Germany, Italy, England, and was successful everywhere. Moreover, he later married and had normal children. Russia, too, was not afraid of all sorts of curiosities. For example, Peter the Great's Kunstkammer was one of the world's largest collections of spirited freaks. This, of course, is not quite a freak show, but the genre is very close. In the early 18th century, the freak show genre branched off from the regular circus. Enterprising businessmen picked up various crippled, sick, and underdeveloped people from the streets and made something like a zoo out of them. Officially, the first performance of a classic freak show is considered to be the demonstration of a woman with a monkey's head taken from Guinea in 1738. However, modern researchers are inclined to believe that the woman was perfectly normal. It's just that the Africans of exotic tribes seemed to Europe at that time something quite strange, and an ordinary African woman, maybe sick with something, looked like a freak. But this is just an assumption. Nevertheless, in Europe, freak shows remained a rare sight. Freaks were still stuck in regular circuses, and freaks were often given to people who were normal, just well disguised. But in the early 1800s, the idea of freak shows made its way to the United States. And the scary golden age began. Barnum and Bailey's American Idol. Up until the 1840s, American freak shows weren't too different from European ones. There were bands of wagons that would wheel around the country, setting up a sideshow in every town and showcasing their freaks. Unlike in Europe, American entertainers approached the matter intelligently. The freaks got fairly high salaries, signed contracts to perform, and generally lived like normal people. The only place where they had to endure the shame of showing their inferiority was the stage. But art requires sacrifice. And in the 1840s, photography began to boom. Freak show owners immediately adopted it. Almost all freak show commercials from that time on were equipped with numerous photo illustrations. Attendance at shows literally grew tenfold in just a few years, as did profits. In the 1880s and 1930s, several hundred circuses specializing in demonstrating human anomalies operated in Europe and the United States. The most famous among them were W. H. Harris's Nickel Plate Circus, the Congress of Living Freaks, and, of course, Barnum and Bailey's Greatest Show on Earth. The latter is worth talking about separately, because it was P.T. Barnum who made his circus the quintessential freak show in the world. Born in 1810, Phineas Taylor Barnum was a businessman by nature and was constantly founding companies and firms, subsequently reselling them or giving them away for debt. He had been a newspaper publisher, a lottery organizer, and a shopkeeper before he realized that people could be cheated in simpler ways. In 1835, he acquired an old Negro slave girl, Joyce Haight, and began driving her around town, claiming that she was 161 and that she had been a babysitter for Washington himself. When interest in the nanny began to wane, Barnum started a rumor that the old woman was mechanical, not alive, and, in a second wave of popularity, collected twice as much money. But then Joyce died. But Barnum found his calling. From 1841, Barnum began to engage in organized demonstration of freaks. Midget Charles Stratton, nicknamed General Tom Thumb, Siamese twins Chang and Ing Bunker, and a number of African and Indian women of unusual appearance for a white man. Stratton was unusually popular in Europe and the United States. Tons of love letters were sent to him, he was invited to society, and even his wedding to the midget Lavinia Warren Barnum framed it as a grand freak show. Barnum founded his most famous circus in New York in 1871. 10 years later, the name of the circus was added to that of James Bailey, co-organizer of the show. For each freak, a unique story and a unique number were devised. For example, Fyodor Yevtushev, a Kostroma boy suffering from hypertrichosis, barked and growled on stage, pretending that he could not speak. Barnum paid very well. People maimed themselves on purpose to gain employment with his circus. The long-haired Sutherland sisters who performed in his circus, each of the 7 sisters had an average of 1.8 meters of hair, made a fortune of $3 million in the late 19th century. Barnum set a new trend in business development. He used many methods then unknown. He spread rumors, viral advertising, invented spam, paper, and so on. Barnum is named after the psychological effect when people trust descriptions of their personality, supposedly created individually for them, but in reality being an empty generic set of words, example, newspaper horoscopes. The 7 Sutherland sisters, who never cut their hair, shone in the Barnum and Bailey Circus in the late 19th century and made a huge fortune from advertising hair care products. The standard freaks. In the golden age of American freak shows, 1850 to 1930, there was a clear classification of the various deviations. Every self-respecting circus was required to have a standard set of freaks plus a few unusual, unique specimens. The latter usually received the highest fees. Circuses bought them off each other, just as they buy up soccer players today. If you liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and write what you think about it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support is very important to me.